over to you, Kalpana. Thank you so much.
Gathering, I think. Do we need the mic? Okay. I mean, she's handed it over. I know. Have no choice. Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for landing up on this early in Delhi at 9:30. Appreciate all of you being here. Um, Pleasure to have the panel here. I have an esteemed panel here, and I would like to begin off the session with asking each one of them to introduce themselves. Maybe a couple of minutes. Hadi, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Kalpana. So good morning, everyone. And so I'm Hadi Riyashid, the CEO of Swiss Reinsurance Company in India. Swiss Re is a global reinsurance company, and big part of our purpose to be. And actually, this week we celebrate 160 years of existence. We're the oldest reinsurer to still operate. And our purpose from day one was making the world more resilient. And so obviously thinking together today on the topic of empowering women, supporting them to close the protection gap and building resilience for them in India is a topic that's close to our heart. And so I'm really happy to be here today amongst this panel.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anant. I'm a partner at Bridgespan. Very quickly, Bridgespan works with philanthropists and impact first investors on topics largely focused on vulnerable populations. Personally, I've been working on women's economic empowerment. And what's also exciting is I just came back from COP, and I think the topic of just adaptation finance and the 20x gap with the reality, but also the energy in the rooms, I think is very exciting. So thank you for having us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Neha Kansara. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Friends of Women's World Banking. Our organization is a 42-year-old organization, and all throughout, the focus for us has been to work towards women's empowerment and women's financial inclusion. In this journey, there were many thematic areas, and it's still evolving, which we have been able to touch upon, like women's empowerment, as I mentioned, livelihood and entrepreneurship promotion, promoting women in agriculture. And around all these thematic areas, we consider ourselves as a capacity building institution. That's how we identify ourselves. And we are also present in the lending space, but we define ourselves as a catalytic lender. So thank you so much for having me here, and looking forward to the discussions.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Purna, representing Samunnati. Samunnati is almost a 10-year-old organization working as an agri-value chain enabler. We work across the agri-value chain with primary focus as leveraging the power of collectivization. So our work cuts across finance, commerce solutions, capacity building, and innovative products for the agri ecosystem. This particular topic is again very, very close to Samunnati's work because it's all about promoting climate smart agricultural practices and how do we drive sustainability through the farmer collectives that we work with. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Sorry, okay, there is a mic there. Okay, thank God. I was wondering this button change. As far as Women's World Banking is concerned, we've been involved with our only focus really has been women and financial inclusion. And, I think all of us feel the impact of the climate change already. And, very many multilateral bodies have actually come up with, how theories and data to back it up. How the wealthiest nations, companies, individuals, drive climate change. But the harmful effects, as we all know, is disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable section of the population, and in this we know that women are probably the most vulnerable. Conversations like this we believe is important because to date, just as finance continues to kind of lack the gender nuance, so does the whole conversation around climate change and its impact. And so I'm thrilled to have a panel, which, in my opinion, is a multidimensional perspective. Okay, thank you. Multidimensional perspective, that this will provide. We have two practitioners in the panel who are going to share what they do on a day-to-day basis in addressing this issue. We have Anant from a point of view of the much required resource, which is the funding, and his perspective on what needs to be done there, what is being done there. And of course, insurance and climate, I think, is almost synonymous right now. And so we've got Hadi representing the insurance community, and to share what's being done. Is it enough? Should we be doing more? And is it all just products? Should it also involve advocacy and things like that? So we know the role of financial service providers in terms of having a critical role in designing and developing these solutions. But one question that I need to just leave it out there is also that the role of how do they see as institutions to embed practices that are prepare ourselves for the climate risk and into their core business operation. How do they reduce their own risk as well? I think it's an interesting. So all the work that Women's World Banking does always has two perspectives. One is, of course, to represent the women that are the most affected, but equally the perspective of the financial service providers, and how is it and what is it that they need to be doing in order to address the issue. So I guess we'll start off with you. Just because you're sitting in that corner doesn't mean I picked out you, Purna. Samunati is India's largest, agri-enterprise. Your work on FPOs, Farmer Collective, is well known. Yeah. Would you say that the work that Samunati has been doing right from the inception, would you say that it always had an underlying climate agenda, given how much you work with the community of and in the agriculture sector? Could you talk through the various segments that you work in and the kind of work, and more importantly, the innovation, that Samunati and other players in your space have actually brought into this issue? Yeah.
So I think Samunati's journey has always been revolving around agriculture. So in a way, it has been an intentional strategy that we promote good agricultural practices, and over the last 60 years or so, the contribution of agriculture to Indian economy has drastically reduced, even though more than 80% of the population still continue to engage in the activity. Half of it is thanks to all the climate risks that we have experienced. The yield has come down. More and more farms are kind of becoming uncultivable, or they need more support in actually restoring the soil health. So from that perspective, I would say yes. But did we have a climate strategy like that being the buzzword now? Definitely no. Not until 4 years ago. When we started with farmer as the focus, smallholder farmer, and how do we empower them and enable them. So most of our work has been always come from the perspective of finance being that lubricant. How finance at a right time can actually make many of these things possible, and that's the kind of work that Samunati started with. But as we started working more and more, we started in 2014. So I think somewhere down the line, 2 years down the line, we realized that FPOs are the way to go if we really want to create an impact, because an FPO has a captive base of at least anywhere from an average of 300 to 1,000 members in most of the geographies. So we started focusing more on our engagement with FPOs, and that's when the capacity building and the advisory services started taking roots. And most of the capacity building was embedded with the power of finance. So it's not just talking about what is good and what should be done, but also giving them the power to kind of deploy those practices. And from there, I would say gradually the journey into gender also began, because the more we started with working with FPOs, we realized that women are like an unpaid laborer in their own forms, than being looked upon as somebody who's a decision maker. And I think few of the policies also mandated women being on the board of FPOs, and that worked in our favor in terms of we being able to anchor core targeted gender-based programs. And I would say, one of our work is in terms of nurturing more and more women farmer members into the boards of these FPOs, not just as a director, but also more as somebody who's empowered to take decisions and be on the negotiation table when it comes to discussing the practices and the price points and all of those. So given all of these, I think 2017 onwards, our focus has been, we came up with a CSA strategy. We have done an entire CSA mapping. So right from pre-production to production and
I just
across
want to explain what the CSA.
climate smart agriculture, and there are multiple phases in agriculture. So what we have done is we have brought in specific focus to pre-production, which is the time when the preparation of the field happens for farming. There are some practices that they can adopt, and adoption of those practices come at a particular knowledge, come at a particular cost. So we provide both. How do we create awareness to adopt those practices, and how do we provide them with appropriate financing to be able to incur expenses. But at the same time, the innovation comes here. Most of the pre-harvest spends, they can repay only post-harvest. Yeah. So, there's no point in coming up with structures where it is not really friendly, and, a standard product does not kind of make any sense. So here is where, Samunati's work through the FPOs are, kind of looking at catering to the pre-harvest needs, but ensuring that they are not put under any undue stress, and they are able to comfortably repay post-harvest when they have seen the benefits. So the other work that we have embarked on is a lot of good agricultural practices promotion. So we have a foundation which is very actively doing a lot of those training programs. We work with a lot of partners in every state who are willing to take this, and we act as the channel. We have access to the FPOs, but we are not technical experts ourselves. So we are the vehicle that takes these expertise to the FPOs, and again, some of these are not really financially linked. Some of these are only kind of creating awareness, because it's a very slow moving engine. The work that we probably started in 2020, now we are seeing results. So you can't expect immediate business results. So the business results come for Samunati with the financial solutions, of course, that we are offering. On the innovation in this particular space for kind of promoting climate smart practices, what we have done is we work with a lot of development financial institutions. So there are certain schemes and the guarantee funds that are available, which helps us take some bold calls. Like for example, a nascent FPO getting a higher credit limit because there is a guarantee scheme, and we can kind of take a new solution to them and encourage them to adopt it. Or an agri startup, not just only the farmer side, also the agri enterprises. There are multiple new age startups who have come up with several climate resilient solutions, but they all need access to market to be able to deploy and promote and deepen their presence. Solar based dryers, for example, we have deployed it in several of our FPOs, and we are showing success stories, so more can come forward, both in the startup side as well as on the FPO side. Likewise, weather stations. How do you take advantage of the weather alerts and immediately change the course of action? Weather alerts at prompt time. We have seen success stories in Maharashtra where the farmers were able to kind of channelize their irrigation plans basis those weather alerts, which in a way kind of closely ties back to some of the other products like insurance, because the moment people say that yes, they have access to weather alerts, access to other products becomes easier for them. Like we have seen insurers now willing to kind of come forward for coverage where they know, yes, these are now empowered farmers who know how to navigate such things. So there's a lot that we have tried in bits and pieces, and some of them are slowly becoming a mainstream product for Samunati, but we work with a lot of partners in this domain to make things happen. So I think I'll pass here.
No, thank you so much. I think this has been a recurrent theme in the in the 2-day deliberations as well. The innovative products that are required. And the product is not just in terms of a standard term loan, but pocket-sized loans, both from a point of and innovations in terms of when it is required and where it is required. So pocket-sized loans, smaller ticket collection abilities to do it every day. I mean, both ends, both in terms of dispersal and collection, and more importantly, at stage of business. I think Samunati, and that's where the expertise comes into play, I guess, right? I mean, you know your market, you know your customers, and so therefore designing products and solutions that are appropriate for your customer segment then just becomes so key. And of course, the other large piece is the enabling environment where you provide your FPOs for all kinds of experimentation, be it a product, be it a distribution. I think amazing, what Samunati has been doing. I'm going to switch gears. And Hadi, I'm not just going by that. Yeah. The study by Swiss Re, and you and I were speaking about it. It stopped me in my tracks, and I think that probably was the purpose as well, which came out saying that by 2050, the impact of climate change was going to be to the extent of between 11 and 13% of the global GDP. This was a study done by Swiss Re, and so that's about 23 trillion. I mean, if you were to quantify the amount, it's a staggering amount, right? And so this is real, and as you said, you're the oldest reinsurer in the business, and so the kind of work that Swiss Re has been doing, even bringing out a report like this to just get a sense of urgency, shall we say, to the work that needs to be done. I think everybody understands the quantum of work that is required to be done to address the protection gap and the climate change. So the insurance industry being one of the backbone, right? I mean, what really is that you're seeing right now across the world and in India in particular, to address these kind of not just huge climatic events, but even people kind of, I guess, underestimate the slow onset issue as well. And there are very deliberate strategies and products around it. So, could you please share your expert opinion on what's happening in the insurance world?
Yeah, thank you, Kalpana. So a question in two parts. What do we see? And also, you said products, what's happening in the insurance space. And maybe a good starting point is to talk about what do we see, and from an insurance industry perspective, what does climate risk look like? We, of course, have a vested interest to understand it because we are in the business of risk. Our job is to assess, quantify, understand risk, to be able to eventually underwrite it and protect people, businesses, economies against risk. And what we see today, is a world that's more volatile than before, and we see a globalized world, urbanized world with an interconnected risk landscape. And somehow when we think of, some of the big risks that put a lot of stress on developing countries, climate is intrinsic and puts even more pressure on all of them. So if you really think of food security, for example, as a topic, and it's no surprise that climatic variations, climate shocks, whether it's droughts, floods, clearly have a big impact on our ability to either have access to fresh water, to produce and get the right yields in agriculture, and eventually be able to provide the food or the production of crop that is needed to be able to feed the world, and particularly the people or the societies in developing countries. When I think of supply chain as a risk, and we've seen it over the past 2 to 3 years, right? How supply chain has crippled a lot of the economies, and so again, cyclones, floods, wildfires, they all complicate matters even further in a world that needs to be more and more connected. Inflation. This is a big topic today, right? And on average, particularly when you look at, I'd say, yeah, even around the world, we see about 50% of the inflation of the basket that of consumer items that we track, almost 50% are exposed to climate and climate risk. And so all of that, and today we live in a world where geopolitics and geopolitical risk is becoming a big concern for all of us. And while not all of the geopolitical risk is motivated by climate, but one can see how climate climate is not just an environmental problem. It can also create social unrest, pressure if people, if you think of food security, inflation, and all of that. So the reality is we have to try to understand and address that from a global perspective. And if I bring that a little bit closer to home, and of course, I've been now here in India for 3 years, and we're really trying to understand as well. India is to me, is a continent by itself, and we see a multitude of risks, particularly when we think about climate, and we see them happening more frequently and more severely than before. And we start with facts. We started to look at the period from 1970 to 2005, and that's 35 years. And if you think of extreme events and count them, there were about 250 in 35 years. And then we looked at the 15 years after that, so between 2005 and 2020, and we were able to register 310 events. So that's more than doubling, of course. What we're not accounting for is the significant increase in exposure and the urbanization and the concentration of assets of people that are impacted and affected. But that by itself obviously was a big indicator that climate risk, climate change is real. We see events more frequently and more severely. So that is a big trigger to what started the study. And the study is, of course, it's a modeling. We use historical data and, of course, a bit of foresight and models that we have to be able to project and understand into the future what could climate change look like for the world. And basically, we looked at 3 scenarios. We looked at a scenario that, at the time of the COP of the Paris Agreement, where we said we want to keep global warming below 1.5. Then we looked at another scenario where we said, it's a scenario in between of a lot of action and committing the world, united, committed to deliver on the reducing emissions and staying below a global warming of 1.5, and then we saw the most extreme scenario of completely no action. And what Kalpana referred to as an extreme scenario, let's say there's very little action that's being done. And the reality is it varies a lot across countries, the kind of action that's currently happening. But let's say there's in an extreme scenario, we see India possibly by 2050 losing almost 35% of its GDP. And that's because a big part of the GDP in India is directly exposed to climate. So almost 40% of it, and agriculture, of course, is a big factor, but there are other services like tourism and services that are as well extremely exposed to climate risk. And so then it becomes, when we try to put a price tag on it and project it into the future, the idea was that will hopefully, usually it's money that gets people moving, right? So how do we quantify? And maybe that is a trigger for governments, for private and public sector to put their hands together to address such a challenge, which, will eventually, when we look down the value chain, it's not just about the economy, it's actually about livelihoods. And it's about human suffering at the end of the day. I mean, any climate shock will have a ripple effect. Sometimes we tend to simplify and say, yes, climate risk is about, a flood, and some cities get flooded, some cars get washed away. You might have seen some of the videos from Chennai earlier last week. But it's actually much more than that. And the reality is, particularly, when we think of agriculture, severe droughts, heat waves, a hotter environment might make certain areas, basically no longer suitable for agriculture. That will lead inevitably to displacement and migration, and families being out of job, displaced, having to move away from their roots, and having to deal with a lot of uncertainty, particularly if that comes on the back of a big shock. That happens also after a huge financial loss. So they're moving with very little to not much. So that's really the context, and I think this is where we start to look at the protection gap, and it becomes very glaring and real to us. And the protection gap simply is, if we have an event, a climate event, or for that sake, we can say any loss, right? Any economic loss. What percentage of that loss is actually insured? What is the protection that people and businesses actually have? And the difference between the two is the protection gap. And what we see consistently over those past 35 years that I shared with you, the data, less than 10% of economic losses in India are actually insured. So that leaves 90% of those losses that either government have to step in, people have to pay out of pocket to recover, or you just never recover sometimes, and send people into deeper poverty or just set them back in financially significantly. And that's where insurance become very important. And what we're trying to do, particularly in the context of India, is part of the solution is to really focus on the low income segment of the society, where climate shocks are enough, as I said, to send those families to poverty or set them back significantly in a position that they're no longer able to go back. And when I think of that, of course, women form a big part of that. The Indian, and you quoted 80%, poor now, but the Indian Council for Agriculture Research say exactly that. 75% of women are involved, participate in crop production. Almost 90% when it comes to aquaculture and animal husbandry, horticulture, more than 80%. So obviously, that is a part and a segment of society that needs a lot of protection against such risks. And so making sure that insurance is available, is affordable, is accessible, raising awareness becomes very, very important. There are a lot of initiatives, and I'll maybe think about one now that's at scale from an industry perspective, and it's actually really heartening for me to see that. It was initiated by the Indian regulator, and it's called the Bima Trinity. And we talk about the Bima Vahag, the Bima Vistar, and the Bima Sugam. And in essence, this is an industry-wide effort to create a women-centric workforce that creates awareness around insurance. We are creating a unified, simple product that is very easy to distribute, very easy to digest, and also very affordable for people to be able to buy, with a big effort to close the protection gap. And the idea is to cover the absolute necessities in terms of businesses and home, health, accident, life insurance. And if we are able to protect these in a meaningful way, then clearly we are strengthening the resilience across I'd say much needed a protection gap and much needed part of society that requires that protection. So that's a great initiative. Both the life insurance industry and the general insurance industry are putting their hands together. They're going to go across the states in India and develop this workforce that, again, I said is women-centric, which is also a great initiative to bring women to the table on financial inclusions and helping the societies they live in to close the protection gap. So a lot of good work. A lot more has to be done when we think of that protection gap. But you know, it's we have to start somewhere. It's not too late. It's still always timely to address climate, but also to protect people and encouraging initiatives across the industry, Kalpana.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Hari. I think I'd react first to the last point that you made on the state insurance plans by the insurance regulator. I think it indeed is heartening for people who've been in this industry for so long. For the first time, you see a vision coming out of the regulator, which is a very inclusive vision. And we at Women's World Banking also have been talking to multiple insurers, both life and non-life, to see, especially the distribution piece, where we've done work with our BCs and BC Sakis and the SHG women. How can they have a livelihood? You touched the point on that as well. Can they make a livelihood out of, being a part of this initiative? But the other piece that I wanted to also touch upon was the sobering vision for India in terms of the, just the 10% covered, and more importantly, the risk, 35%, I think you mentioned. And for all of this, we need capital. And here, Anand, I'll ask you to comment, given your recent visit to and participation in COP, and we need a lot more capital, don't we? We know, while we're talking at a macro level, it's governments that require, but equally, if I were to apply the micro lens in terms of women, the whole access to credit and for a woman is so much more difficult given the barriers, and but that's not going to flow if countries and organizations at large do not have access to meaningful capital. The role of the macro players like the government, etc., to design products that will actually ensure that the capital flows in the right way in order to design the right products. I mean, you and I spoke about it, but it was wonderful, the conversation. And if you could please shed some light on the kind of capital, the kind of innovations that you believe should happen. We talked about some of those ideas. It'll be wonderful to hear your perspective on that.
Sure, and thank you. I mean, Samunati's story is very inspirational always, and Adi, it's great to hear how you're thinking so far ahead. I'd share two perspectives, and unfortunately, our name is also Bridgespan, so in a way, there is a huge. So one side, there is great opportunities, agri, women's economic empowerment, like very, very inspiring. And I think, women are at the very center of the change. Women are the people affected, but also are the people with the solutions. They are, I'd always bet on a woman than on a man, like if I was putting in an investment. So I think there's a very optimistic side to it. The other side, like if you think about finance globally, there is about $300 billion needed every year to actually make adaptation actions or resilience and just transition actions actually happen. And this money obviously has a very large part of concessionary capital, because unless you get in concessionary capital, you can't put in place the solutions needed for the underprivileged, poorer sections of society, women, etc. Because non-concessionary capital will work just like a Zomato will work. It's great, but that won't solve the problem. So if you then get to the 300 billion needed globally, I think India needs about 75 billion. Maybe it needs more, but let's say we have 3 billion right now coming through, 3. So 75 billion needed, 3 billion coming through. Now, is it because there is no money which is concessionary? Of course not. It is because less than 5% of the total concessionary capital actually comes to adaptation finance. Almost all the money goes through into electric vehicles. So just to give you a sense, for all the private equity money as well as investing money, 1.2 billion which came to India, 95% went to 5 electric vehicle mobility companies. Is that not great? That's fantastic. Does that need 95% of the money? Maybe not. So that's the conundrum right now, which is how can there be a balanced view of good for the planet, emissions, but also good for the people. And I think the good for the people is translating to livelihoods. It's translating to economic shocks. It's translating to health. Um, just a case in point, it's predicted now, who knows, touch wood, it's predicted in the year which is coming, there'll be 45 heat wave days in India. 45. Play this out in your mind. 45 heat wave days means women who are in the farms, informal workers, people who don't have the luxury of staying in the home. It's not the middle class, but it is not going to be unlikely that we will start seeing deaths happening next year. 45 heat wave days means at some point the body stops and loses its capacity for evaporation. So self-cooling. It affects poorer people more, it affects women more, it affects children more, older people more. So in some ways, I think we are headed to a situation where there is a stark gap between how money is flowing and how life is actually affecting the poorer sections, women especially. And at that point, the question will be, what are those vehicles? What are those actions we can put in place? My own sense, and like having looked at some of the numbers, it is not a fully solvable problem. If you just look at the numbers and what is needed, I mean, despite all the efforts, despite all the money coming in, there'll still be untold distress. The size of our farms are too small to actually, get a very cohesive action going. The fertilizer dependence that we have had since the Green Revolution is too strong to pull out very fast. So we are going down into a fairly, danger zone. The question is not whether we'll go down. We are going down. The question is how fast are we able to come out? Do we go full tilt inside, or do we, sort of are able to come out without too much distress? And I think the role of finance and maybe, and that's at least in COP, the question was very clear. Unless global financial concessionary capital comes into the mix, most of this capital sits on the border of Canada and US. Unless it comes into the mix to solve for, and jointly on topics in India, India alone, with its non-concessionary capital, will not be able to solve it. So there's a real global play, I think, needed at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very sobering messages indeed, but I do believe we need to be hopeful because, as Anant, as you said, women are at the center of the solution as well. Even though there's overrepresentation of women in the low-income community, we know that of the 1.3 billion people living in poverty, 70% are women. Overrepresentation in sectors of highly, vulnerable to climate change. Again, we have a huge section, and here I allude to the point that you made earlier, which is 60% of the agricultural sector is women, and that we know is massively impacted by climate change. And of course, the whole gendered, the norms that come in the way of her being able to have a say in the finances of her own family, leave alone the rest of the economy. Neha, FWWB as an organization has been laser sharp in addressing some of these issues when it comes to low-income women. You have an enviable track record in terms of the work that FWWB has been doing in this space. And I know that you have a couple of very innovative solutions. While it may not have started out exactly as a climate initiative, but more from a sanitation and from a providing livelihoods, in the weaker sections of the country, particularly Northeast, etc. You've done a lot of work there. That along with some of the other ways in which your organization has been looking at climate change. I think it would be very useful for the audience here to hear.
I would start with sharing that the focus of our organization is very well aligned with Women's World Banking, because we started as an affiliate to Women's World Banking, and right from inception, there are two core focus areas for our organization. One is women's empowerment and women's financial inclusion. And in this entire journey of working with women for 4 decades now, I would define our organization as a very dynamic organization, meaning that every step that we have taken in the past years, or every initiative or service that we could bring in for the women, had actually come up from the women's side, meaning that we were very closely working with the women and trying to understand their lives, their drudgeries, what is it that the women need, and that itself helped us to design or come up with initiatives which worked for women, which were needed by the women. Um, for women's empowerment and women's financial inclusion, um, right from the beginning, we worked with women at the grassroots. We, as a capacity building institution, we trained them, we capacitated them. We also understood the importance of collectivization, wherein we started working on SHG strengthening activities also. And this was long back in 80s. But then when we looked back, we felt that what is it? We have worked with women, we have empowered them, but what's next, right? Unless the women have financial independence, things do not work well for them. And what do? That's where we shifted our gears again, and then we moved from just women strengthening and group strengthening activities to promoting livelihoods and entrepreneurship for women. Again, we continued, we built the capacities, worked closely with the women for many years, empowering them, sharing or building their knowledge in terms of initiating livelihoods or running their nano businesses, which we have continued till date. And when that started happening, we observed that women are now capacitated, but they need credit, they need funds. The segment with which we work, they do not have ample funds at their own end, which could be invested in the livelihood or the business activity. And when they were seeking out for support externally by reaching out to financial institutions or bank, unfortunately, there were not many players who were keen to support this segment. So that's where one more layer of need emerged. And though we never ever thought of being there in the credit space as an organization, but we initiated credit support for the women. Very right point raised by Anand just now, that there is so much of fund available in this space. But particularly if we look at the segment that we work with, they would definitely need concessional funding. Fortunately, we have that liberty as an organization because we can raise grant funds, and that's what we have been doing, even bringing in grant funds which can be made for catalytic use, wherein we are creating credit facilities for the women by providing them concessional credit support. So that's where we also started working in the credit space. Coming to the point of climate, in this entire journey, what we also started observing is that climate and climate change is tremendously impacting the women that we work with. Even at the household level, we felt that it is an added burden, and it's definitely increasing the drudgery that women are facing. And not very consciously, but subconsciously, we also started working on it as an organization. I'll quote one example of certain regions where we felt that water and the access to water was truly difficult for women, and they actually had to travel long distance and locations to even acquire the day-to-day need for the water. And that was actually adding in a lot of burden and taking away a lot of their productive hours. And we came up with a loan product. Again, before coming with this loan product, I would say that the need itself emerged from the women. So we sat with them, we tried to listen to them. What is it that is needed? What is it, if we come up with a water solution or water connection, whether you would be keen to take it up? So we try to understand their needs first. Secondly, in line with that, we tried to look out for solutions that we could offer as an organization. And the catalytic funding part is what we initiated there. Parallelly, we also focused on creating awareness, because that is something which we strongly recommend, not only for our organization, for any other FSPs also, that whenever you are working with this segment, straight away offering the credit lines or credit services I'm not sure how does that work, because it definitely needs a lot of literacy effort, a lot of awareness bringing. And if both these things go hand in hand, then the uptake and the impact would be much better. So the same mechanism we adopted um, for these products. And the fourth piece is we also look at periphery support mechanisms or stakeholders who could be brought in the entire system. On these lines, I would also like to give an example of the solar energy initiative, which particularly because we had been working with women in the northeastern region in the state of Manipur in the last 10 years. That was in, I would say, 2010 onwards, we started working there. And the initiative started with livelihood and entrepreneurship support. But there too, we observed that in the remote locations, access to electricity was truly limited. And we took up a small survey there, and it was alarming to know that within these poor households or these low income households, uh, they ended up spending almost 30 to 40 rupees per day on the alternate sources of fuel that they were using to, as a source of light, particularly towards kerosene or other sources. And this was truly alarming. That's where we thought that let us come up with some solution. Let us look at some renewable energy run lighting device related solution, which would not only help the women at their household level, but also at their livelihood or business level, because in these regions, because it normally gets dark by 3 or 4, the actual productive time for the business activity is also very limited. So if we are able to bring in some solution, maybe the productive hours or the working hours for these entrepreneurs would also increase. So that's where we came up with this concept and idea of bringing in solar energy run lighting device support for women. And here again, two things went parallelly. We started creating awareness among the women in terms of what are the products, how they can make use of it, whether they are ready. So we also shared few products and the dynamics, the operational dynamics of these products, and whether they were ready to take it up, what are the service requirements, and so on. On the sidelines, we also designed a credit product for the women, which was affordable, truly affordable. The tenor of this loan was also planned in a way which was, which provided ample comfort for the women, and it did not create any stress at their household or their, at the individual level in terms of repaying. And there were many other features too. Apart from that, the fourth piece was that we also try to identify the suppliers, because just providing the loan might not help them. So we also actively worked on identifying the right kind of vendors and the right kind of products that we could introduce for the women in that region. It could be small solar lanterns, and it could also be solar home lighting systems, which could be useful in running one tube light, one fan, and maybe some electronic equipment at their household level. So we tried to introduce 2 or 3 product ranges. We identified the vendor. We ensured that the vendor also provides services, because just introducing the product might not be enough. And how do we ensure that the services are also provided to the women? And when I look back, I really feel happy that in the past years, we have now been able to support more than 1.2 lakh households through this initiative, and we are still counting that. So I think I'll stop here. And before that, just 4 things which I truly recommend. I've already elaborated on that. Is that please listen to women. Please try to see what they need. Just look into their lives. That is the first thing. Second is, please pay attention, or please put in some efforts on literacy and awareness. Third is, try to design your products in a way which suits the women's requirement the most. And fourth is, also try to bring in some kind of periphery support mechanisms or other stakeholders too in the services that you are trying to offer to women. Thank you.
It was a passionate request from Neha. That pretty much follows what we do in Women's World Banking as well. All our work around the globe is predicated on building evidence, because at the end of it, we have what is called a women-centered design. And to the core of the women-centered design is that, yes, solutions for the low-income women, but at the same time, it's got to make business sense for the financial service providers that are involved in solving this. And so building evidence is very crucial, like what Neha mentioned, right? You know, we do the work at the ground level. We go with testing some hypothesis to figure out if this even makes sense. And then we work with the financial service providers to design models, distribution systems, products that will help reach and make business sense for the financial service provider. And the last piece, which we've also been actively involved in, one such is what we are doing here, which is advocate, which is really to bring awareness to the causes that require attention, resource, and more importantly, action. And that involves action with leadership. So how to bring in the gendered sensitivity at the leadership level, how to have representation at the leadership level, equip them with the training that is required for them to actually think about and take action, and working closely with policymakers. And we have an exclusive program called the Leadership and Diversity Program for regulators, and that's what it precisely does. Work with the regulators to bring in the gender component front and center in all that they do when it comes to the policy making, and eventually, of course, influence the FSPs to actually take action. So, Neha, that was preaching to the converted, at least as far as Women's World Banking is concerned, because that's precisely what we do at Women's World Banking as well. So that brings us to the first round of discussion. I found it very enriching, to hear the different perspective from practitioners, the product manufacturers, and equally the funders. The next piece, and maybe just a quick 5-minute conversation around that before we throw it open. I think any conversation, and Ragini has left the room, but Ragini was like, could we ensure that we have more audience participation? It can't just be a conversation between the four of you. You may enjoy the conversation, but I think it would be richer if we involve the audience in the deliberations. So at the end of it, we'll have about 10-15 minutes where we'll throw it open to the audience. Let's reverse the order a bit. Neha, let's start with you. In terms of what needs to be done more in terms of pushing the agenda. We talked about what's happening, but what more should be done? I think that's something, while your 4-point passionate plea it did touch upon those items. Is there anything more that you believe should be done in this space? Yeah.
So I think broadly my 4 pointers did cover that, but there are 2 more pointers which I would like to add. I suggest that any organization working in the women's space and working towards women's empowerment, and also including the climate aspect there, definitely needs to establish a strategic gender-based financial inclusion agenda within their organization very consciously. The second piece is on the importance of data. Of course, I've tried to touch that upon in my last conversation, but it's very important for organizations to capture the right kind of data and also particularly focus on gender-based aggregated data, which would really help them to truly understand the need and also design their services and initiatives accordingly. I think I'll stop there.
Hadi, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I have to say very inspiring, the effort and the concrete work on the ground. And I think that's really important, starting from the grassroots. When we talk about financial inclusion, we need to be able to understand needs and touch, people's lives and impact people's lives positively. So we need to find ways to accelerate and amplify that. And to my mind, I think one of the opportunities that we have today is the advancement of technology, and the opportunities that it creates for us. I mean, we've seen a complete transformation of the entire financial sort of system during the pandemic. A lot of more people, we've done lots of surveys, particularly when we talk about insurance, but more generally in financial services. We've seen a lot of people becoming comfortable to engage and embrace in transactions online, purchases online. And so how can we leverage technology to raise awareness, to make financial products, whether insurance or other products, more accessible, more available, but equally as well more affordable. And so scale is really important when we talk about affordability. It becomes easier to distribute to the masses and gain the benefits of that scale. Another piece, I think technology might be a bit, a narrow alley by itself. We need partnerships. How can we build meaningful partnerships? How can we widen the outreach? How can we bring the public sector to the table? And that's really important. It's really hard for me to imagine the private sector alone tackling this. It's equally even harder to imagine the public sector tackling this alone. So there needs to be concerted effort. We need to work with across sectors, across industries. How can an insurer partner with agriculture, startups, agri-tech to scale, distribute products, for example. So these are the type of initiatives that are the need of the hour today. I think that's really when I talk about especially the context of our topic today, financial inclusion, empowering women, that's going to be really important. On the bigger theme of climate risk and climate change that we've tackled, and it's, I guess our topic today is in two parts. You just came back from COP. There's a lot of talk about adaptation. We need to as well make sure that we see that through. We need to see the energy transition. We need to have an industrial transition, agriculture as well. How it all ties in together. We cannot just work to close a protection gap without stopping the leakage. I think you mentioned, how far will we go? We need to stop going and kind of accelerate that curve of recovery that we have. And so really investing and committing to decarbonization, to energy transition, to supporting more sustainable future for India, for the world is absolutely critical from my perspective.
Thank you. Thanks, Hadi. So, Neha, you spoke about the need to have gender disaggregated data. Yes, absolutely. Only when you have data can you actually figure out what needs to be done. Hadi, your point on technology, very powerful. Our work at the ground level has also been, women are very adept at embracing technology, but they need a little bit of hand-holding and patience. But once given, they take off. And so the whole digital financial capability is something that we have been working very closely with multiple partners at the ground level. Anant, I know that you had some very strong inputs that you wanted both from policymakers and from the kind of north-south, both players from north and south in terms of designing products. So your wish list, please.
Thank you, Kalpana. It's exciting because some of these intersectional opportunities are in front of us. So maybe four wishes in the list. So one is, today we are at 5% of the total climate finance coming to adaptation, any topic connected directly with people, adaptation, just transition, resilience. If the goal is to get that to 30%, which is eminently needed and doable, it's a 6x, but it's 30 out of 100. Four things. One is, how can we actually create 100 bold, equitable bets? What is the definition of bold? It means 100 crore concessionary capital coming in, chasing about 1,000 crores of non-concessionary capital. So Now, where does this concessionary capital come? It comes from philanthropy, impact investing, global DFIs, etc. But 100, because with 100 there'll be enough to actually do some justice to at least create a solid example. There is also, like FOMO is one of the most critical parts of why capital comes in. So if the 100 come in, the 1,000 after the 100 will find it easier to come in. There's a reason why so many bets happen on solar. I think the second one, just to build on your point on education, uh, education to make it clear that bets in topics like women, topics around adaptation, are not any less interesting, attractive, and doable than bets on large infra bets. There's a perception that while it's great to invest in women and a lot of this, like, I agree, like if I put my hand inside, I'll lose my hand. That perception has to go away. So how do we make it simpler? It's a little bit like mutual funds. It's without learning how to invest in all trades, a mutual fund makes it easier. So maybe there's a need for that. Third, how do we create the global north, global south connect? There is actually intent. It was very clear in many entities. It's not just like a logical need, it's a moral need now. But how does that intent translate through organizations like Samunati, Women's World Banking, like with other organizations in the global north, like, let's say, Climate Works Foundation and many others, to actually create these powerful bridges? And of course, the fourth one is, how do we create a culture of innovation where our brightest talent in IITs and other great organizations are not all like going after the best food delivery apps? Like, that's great, but how do we actually create a momentum so that they are actually solving for things in the farm, like on-farm products? It's actually such a technical complexity on how do you do multi-cropping. How do you align drone tech with multi-cropping is actually an unsolved issue today. It's not unsolvable, but it needs like good minds. So these are the 4 wish lists, and I'm sure like they're all doable with the group here. Thank you.
Over to you.
I think many points are already covered, so I'll probably not repeat, but definitely from a very practitioner standpoint, if we were to come from a Samunati agri value chain enabler perspective, there is a huge capital gap, and a lot of more resources that needs to come in to be able to make these things possible. And almost everything would be a repetition if I were to say the same thing in my own words. But I think one other larger piece, is about, again, we are talking about gender, women. We are talking about the current generation, the new generation that's coming into, needs empowerment right at the start. So somewhere, this is, my passion talk in any women's forum that I talk about. How are we working with the younger generation? How are we working with, the school-going kids? How do we engage with them at this point of time to create that awareness and make them embrace these things at an early stage? Not really something like, a banking industry can solve for, but then, the public-private sector together coming and, working towards how do we nurture a future generation. I think, that's one major area that needs attention.
I think when we discussed, you brought in a very interesting point on policy intervention on some of the kind of products. Why don't you share that? I think that's a concrete, actionable, Purna.
Yes. So, one of the other things, like when I was briefly talking about our work, I spoke about, the guarantee schemes and some of the other specific capital that's available. So there are also a lot of inherent limitations for the Indian companies, especially NBFCs or financial services providers, to tap into that pool. It's not very easy. It's not very easy to kind of say, I will get in. I'm sure Anant here has more practical inputs around some of the challenges that the players face in India. That definitely requires solving for. And we were also looking at the startup ecosystem per se, and one particular conversation that happened as a prelude to this was women in entrepreneurship in the agri startup space. More from there are many women entrepreneurs in multiple other areas and avenues, but when you specifically talk for gender, when you specifically look at solving for climate challenges, we don't find that many energy. There is an inherent limitation in many of our systems. And probably, it's by way of, some regularization as a percentage allocation. So can we bring in some, specific targeted cohorts to be nurtured, especially around, there are many incubators that are doing fantastic work in this space. So if there could be a slight, approach tweak where, there is a dedicated cohort of promoting, climate entrepreneurs, who will focus on solving only adaptation challenges, or, we have been talking about protection gap, and, a lot of this have to converge at some point. So I think a dedicated uh, policy level intervention, making these things more enabling. Currently we have it, but it is perhaps not very intentional as we speak. So if we could look at driving it as an intentional approach, there are a lot of us here and many other corporates outside, who can play an active role in taking it to the masses and, ensure that it gets the requisite attention.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. So I think the wish list from the panel is fairly clear. Now, okay, I have Pallavi. Oh, okay, lots of hands going up. Oh my God. Okay, this is not staged. I've not created the questions. I've not seeded the questions. Yes, please. And please also state whom is it directed at. Yeah.
Can I just ask? Yes. Yeah, hi, I'm Pallavi from Women's World Bank. Actually, fantastic panel. I had a question for each of you, but I'm just going to choose one question. My question is to Anand. This is with reference to the 100 crore capital, that concessional capital at which at the back you hope that 1,000 crores will come in. So if you had that 100 crores and you could allocate it such that you could encourage a much larger amount of capital coming in, how would you allocate that number?
I think the question is finished, but they took a lot of effort to reach
Well,
the mic.
question is done. How would you allocate that 100
So I think we'll probably share one of our mics around. Maybe that may make it easier.
We have a spare.
Yes, we have a spare.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for the question. And so, two parts to that. One is, at least the way we are seeing the need for bold, equitable bets is, it's a little bit like, you want to launch a space shuttle, you have to hit 7 miles a second velocity. If you don't put enough fuel to hit 7 miles a second and you stop at 6 miles a second, it will not escape the gravitational field of the Earth. So the 100 crores is for one bold bet. Now, what is a bold bet? It could be that there is a parametric insurance product aimed at women smallholders, aimed at people who are women who are in informal economies, which is able to put in money a day before or a week before, or at least in the same week as a heat wave comes in. And it is not a very large amount, it's a small amount, but there'll be need for research, there'll be need for real good data around it, but there'll also be need for dissemination, education, and of course some amount of technology linkage between, for example, climate systems and the UPI system. All of that will never be paid for by anyone who's not actually tapping into concessional capital. So that 100 crores needs to go into enabling that. All of that should be open sourced, and after that it should become a standard product. Success is, after a point in time, it is widely adopted by non-concessional players to say, this is what we want to do to make money. But that initial period, that's a thought. And that's why you need 100 of them, because there are so many. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Saumini from Dwara Research. I had a question to Mr. Anand. Um, yeah, so a lot of the conversation around climate resilience, building climate resilience, is really talking about changing the way businesses function, or say, for instance, if you're talking about agriculture, really building climate smart agriculture. But I feel another important, significant part of building climate resilience is also changing the relationship that we have with natural resources. So essentially how businesses utilize natural resources. And so part of it, for instance, is really about water resources or common property resources. For instance, if you're talking about animal husbandry or grazing, especially when it comes to agri and allied activities. So I feel a lot of conversation needs to be also around protection of those natural resources. So my question to Mr. Anant was, do you think there's a place for private equity or private capital here? And what can be really done for them to, for private equity to take a sort of really constructive sort of part in building this part of climate resilience?
And maybe I'll also pass it on Neha, because I think she has done this work in the field also. At least the little we understand is, for any non-concessionary capital to come in, they have to see the path to returns. Path to returns usually only comes in from two ways. Either the middle class of India will pay for that particular product, or the government will pay for that product. Now, the challenge with some of the commons is it's not clear, at least to us, why a consumer will actually pay for it. It's usually going to be paid for by the government. And things which are paid for by the government usually will not fall into the same zone at which you can't see a private equity or an investor coming in. So maybe it is simpler to divide it into two chunks. Is this particular opportunity at some stage going to become relevant to the middle class of India? If so, absolutely it should only go the route of tapping into private capital and blending it. But if it is, on the other hand, something like health for the poorest of the societies, or things to protect women from trafficking, or things around commons, I think the government needs to pay. And that goes into a slightly different direction. But I'd love to hear, Neha, your thoughts.
I think very rightly mentioned, Anant. Basis my own experience, also what I feel is that yes, there is a very strong need to work towards preserving the natural resources, and a lot of efforts can be done by the private players in that direction too. But if we look at the focus of the funds which are coming in, if we talk about the concessional funding, then as rightly mentioned by Anant, even if it would be concessional funding, there has to be a return path, and that's what the investors or the funders are looking at. And there are few philanthropic funding which are core grant funds, which institutions like us do get. But there too, I think people are very much focused in terms of what is the impact, the immediate impact which they really want to see in 1 year or 2 years time, that they are able to see after investing these funds or donating these funds as grants. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen in a very short duration. So hence I feel that there is limited interest from the philanthropists also in that space. And what I also feel is, as rightly mentioned by Anand, is that government definitely has to take up this piece more actively, which they are probably, and limited scope for institutions like us to take it up.
Hi, I'm Sonia Kelly from Women's World Banking, and I can also talk loudly. Thank you so much for this important conversation. I'm leaving really haunted by Anant's comment that this is an unsolvable problem. I wanted to ask about resilience to climate shocks. So like after a climate event happens, like what is the path to resilience? We just published a study this week at Women's World Banking on women migrants and their financial resilience. And while they weren't climate migrants that we were looking at, I'm sure the problems are kind of similar. So it's something that's on my mind. And we often, like when there's a climate event, reference insurance as like, oh, there was a severe weather event and then the insurer came in and paid everybody and then it was fine. Or if they didn't have insurance, it wasn't fine. But I assume that with systemic and predictable shocks, insurance will not necessarily be always viable. So like in places where we can predict that there are going to be 47 heat wave days, the business case might not be there for insurance is my assumption. So I just wonder about, you also mentioned government interventions play a role, but I wonder as well about whether there is a business case for other private sector solutions to to resilience to predictable climate shocks and what that product mix looks like. So maybe that's a question for Hadi or for Purna or for Neha. One of you could take it, I'm sure.
Sure, I can start. It's a lot of, there are a lot of topics that you raised, and let's start with climate resilience and the ability of societies to withstand these. And I agree with you that it really depends also where, right? Of course, cities are affected differently than agriculture areas. When we think of India, when we think of the metropolitan parts or the big urbanized center, there are different kind of investments that are being made to prepare them, protect them. but also they have better protection financially, right? They are better because these are the hubs. So then the question becomes, how do we attract the private sector to go all the way to those distant and remote areas to provide protection there, either investments or prevention measures. So, you know, when we think of flood, if you want to build better infrastructure to protect against flood, or maybe you know, bring technology to help with smart agriculture, and manage the weather better. And so I really think in the first place, it a little bit ties back to the discussion we just had on capital. There needs to be a public sector, private sector effort, and really government have to lean in on this, because sometimes it's, you know, by nature, right? Private sector focuses on where the returns come faster. That's kind of how industry works today. But there is, I mean, if we really think about India, and we're looking today at India to become the third biggest economy in the world, you know, down in another 10 years time, and we need a lot of people to contribute to that growth. So how can the public sector partner and invite the private sector, facilitate, pave the way, pay that first 100 to bring the additional 900? And so, for example, I mean, I can give one example that we've worked, you know, with. We worked with the state of Nagaland, and we worked with Tata AIG as a general insurer, and we developed a parametric solution for insurance that covered the entire state of Nagaland against excess rainfall or flood, eventually landslides as well. And so the idea was, how can we protect at scale? And of course, funding has to come. Someone has to pay for it, because today individuals might not have the awareness or the ability to pay individually for their homes. And so there was an initiative that says, okay, I'm aware of that exposure. How can I protect my state better? There are a lot of examples like this on agriculture. Now, sometimes the problem, these solutions might not alone be enough, and that's where we talk about it has to be across industry. So just protecting via insurance is not going to be enough. So there needs to be, you know, you talked about adaptation, we talk about other investments. We need to build better infrastructure, education, and kind of eventually help people prosper as well in those areas. So it is not a simple and easy answer, and if we had it, we would already be, on all of us not here, on our way there executing. But I mean, I think as humanity, right, and of course we deal with a lot of adversity. Sometimes we are the cause of a lot of the problems, but when it matters the most, we also are able to come together to solve big problems. And I think, you know, now more than ever, this is becoming very real. The attention that COP has gotten and is getting year in, year out, the concerted effort of policymakers to really put policies in place. You know, we see in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in India introduce a disclosure requirement around ESG, and that's going to be mandatory for all companies that are publicly listed, and eventually, you know, will cascade throughout the system. So there's really a concerted effort here that gives hope and gives creates opportunity for people to come together to solve this problem.
I'm just conscious of the time, and I've already been warned. Do I have time for one or two? One question? Yeah.
May I?
Yes, please.
Hello, hi. This is Priyadarshini Ganesan from Dwara Research. So we are talking about climate, be it mitigation or adaptation. It's a collective action problem, as Saumani has already pointed out. But in the low-income segment, largely climate comes very low in the order of salience. So, but when it comes as a community, when a group of women come together and decide that, you know what, this is going to happen in my locality, and this is something that we need to protect ourselves from, then the action becomes a lot more doable, tangible, and something that can easily be solutioned for. But what and he mentioned about public-private partnership, and you mentioned about governments having to pay for a lot of things. But like for a low-income country like India, different tiers of government have different abilities to first collect money from the raise taxes or revenues, and also to be able to deploy that effectively. So do you think there is merit in coming up with products that leaves the discretion of choosing to do something about climate change to the community or a group of women? We've seen that working out again and again. Samunati is one example. You work with FPOs. So does it make sense to think about groups of women rather than just women in solving for products?
I'm going to just uh, exert my role as a moderator and kind of jump in here. I think women have to be in the center of the design of the product. That's been our experience, and I think that came through from all our conversations, both from Neha and as practitioners, and we have been involved in those conversations when it comes to designing, what is relevant. And that would involve field, would involve working with the team, and we do it across product categories, not just for climate. Even from even as simple as, and what we believe is intuitive as savings, it comes naturally to a woman. But can there be an incentive to a saving to bring her into the formal financial system? This is the work that we've done with very large public sector banks. So to answer your question, absolutely, yes. Women have to be involved in the design of the solution. Only then I think everybody agrees here, and so I speak for the panel. I hope we've answered your question. And how do we ensure that this is heard and perspective is provided to make business sense in order to actually translate into solutions that are actually viable? I think that's the piece, that's the more critical one. Designing alone will not solve the problem, but how to make it viable for those financial institutions so that it makes business sense for them. If you're able to bridge that gap, I think then we have a good solution. Yeah. I think I've run out of time, right? We've run out of time? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. Yes, please. Why don't you just stand up and ask the question?
Yeah, hi everyone. So first of all, thank you so much, and I must congratulate this panel for raising concern about this particular topic. I'm Neeraj. I'm a development finance professional, and I took career break this year in order to promote couple of grassroots level agencies in Uttarakhand, those who are particularly promoting agroecological value chains. Because the change we are talking about, it is happening right now. I just quote an example.
I'm so sorry, but could you jump to the question?
Yeah, I'm coming to the question. I'm coming to the question. Many of these women beneficiaries are facing climate based problems, particularly landslide and heavy rainfall, right? So in order to provide solution, we adopt this agroecology principle. So I have a question and a submission for agencies like Samunati and FWWB. So do we have any plan to design product, particularly those who are focusing on such practices? And other than that, in the form of concessional finance, are we also planning to incentivize such people, those who are availing or those who are practicing these kind of principles? Thank you.
I think from a Samunati standpoint, where we are doing value chain financing and where we work with specific cohorts which are working on identified projects, yes, we do this already. Perhaps not, what you are talking about as agroecology. We work in agroforestry. We have worked on several other areas in several other geographies. So definitely, it's all customized, and we take a community view than a collective, geography view. So that definitely exists. But passing back the concession, again, I think we have discussed this extensively. It depends about, it all is again dependent on what is your cost, like what is the cost of fund for the player who is providing the funds, to what is it that they are giving back either to the soil, to the community, where this can again kind of become an impact funding or an impact finance. So it is not a straightforward answer. It would definitely be very customized and highly local. And I think organizations like us do this already, and it will only kind of depend further.
Thank you. I think that's about it. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. For I've had a great time, and I'm sure our audience did too.
Thank you so much, dear panelists, for a very thought-provoking and enriching discussion. It has been a huge learning for me as well, hearing each one of you and the kind of work you guys are doing on ground. And special thank you to Kalpana for brilliant moderation and asking the right kind of questions. Thank you so much, audience, for being participating and as well as asking questions. We have a small token of our appreciation for you. May I request the souvenirs to be gifted? Thank you so much. And can we have a big round of applause for our panelists? We will have a quick networking break for say around 7 to 10 minutes. I'm sorry, we are actually running out of time. The next session is about to start at 11:15. So I would request you to sort of reconvene, and I'll see you soon at 11:15. Thank you so much.